Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Whiskey Wednesday. I'm Mark Gillespie in the WhiskyCast.com studio in Haddonfield, New Jersey. Hope you've had a good week so far. It has been an interesting one with the pandemic, with the threat of tariffs again, with economic disruption all over the place. That old proverb, may you live in interesting times, has probably never been more true than it is now. We've got a great lineup coming up for you this afternoon on the webcast. We'll be talking in just a second with Christine LoCascio of the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States about the tariff issue. We'll also be joined in a few minutes by Jackie Zykan, the master taster for Old Forester Bourbon, and Jared Himstedt, the head distiller at Balcones Distilling down in Waco, Texas. We'll be talking about all things bourbon, single malt, you know the whole drill. That's sort of what we do around here. So if you've got comments, if you have questions for any of our guests, you can always put them into the various chat rooms online, on our Facebook page, the YouTube channel, and on Periscope. If you're watching us on Twitter, do not respond to the tweet with our live feed in it because we won't see that one until after the show ends. But if you can jump on Periscope real quickly or one of the other platforms, you can send your questions in to us. Let's turn now to the business of whiskey and talking about politics right now. We need to note that the U.S. is reviewing the tariffs that were imposed last October on single malt whiskeys from Northern Ireland and Scotland. For some reason, they left Wales and England out of it, and I don't think anybody's ever actually been quite able to explain why. Maybe Christine LoCascio can tell us with the Distilled Spirits Council. Christine, how are you today?
Hi, good. It's nice to see you. Thank you for having me on.
Do we ever know why the administration left England and Wales out of this thing, or did they just realize or not realize that, hey, they make single malts too?
Maybe they just didn't know. I think they were just trying to be very strategic with the products that they chose.
Yeah, I hear that. Now let's talk about the second semi-annual or quarterly review that the U.S. Trade Representative's Office is going through right now. We're in the middle of a 30-day comment period for the public to weigh in on this, right?
Yes. Comments are due by July 26th.
And what are you hoping for here? You've already had over 1,000 come in through Spirits United so far. What's the goal here?
I think the goal is to make people understand what the impact would be of continuing to apply tariffs on imported products, imported spirits from the EU. But also there's a potential here that the US may impose, either increase those tariffs from 25% to anything as high as 100%, or to expand the list of products. So they're also considering imposing tariffs on gin, on vodka, on brandy. And so the impact of that on consumers in the US, and frankly, everybody in the hospitality industry in the US, which obviously during this critical economic period has been so difficult, particularly for the on-premise. So now is not the time. And frankly, imposing more tariffs at this time would just escalate the trade war in spirits that has been going on for over 2 years now. As you know, American whiskeys have been subjected to a 25% tariff to the EU since June of 2018. And that has honestly devastated our exports to that critical market.
How much so? Can you give us numbers? I know that as of a month or so ago, it was something over $350 million, something along those lines.
So from a percentage standpoint, yes, about 33% based on the latest data on a rolling year basis. It's been a 33% decline. And if you think about that, yes, that's a huge number, but after many, many years of double-digit growth to that market. So, we fear that we're losing the hearts and minds of consumers in the EU by not, continuing to expose them to our great American whiskey products, which are made all over the United States.
Now we have another deadline coming up here, potentially by the end of this month. The World Trade Organization could rule on the other aircraft dispute over subsidies. This one involving Boeing in the U.S. and ruling in favor of the EU. What happens then?
So what will happen is the WTO will make a determination about how much the EU can retaliate against the United States. And the EU has put rum, vodka, and brandy on their list of many products, but of potential products that they would impose tariffs. So that decision, we don't know the exact date, but maybe later this summer, possibly early September, they'll come out with that number. And then the EU will make a decision. We expect very promptly after they get that number, what products to put tariffs on. And so the risk here is that if the U.S. increases tariffs and expands the list of spirits that they put on the tariff list right now, that will basically just prompt the EU to impose more tariffs on American spirits products. And rums, vodkas, and brandies are on that list.
And that's on their preliminary list of what could be hit with this?
Yes, and yes, it is. Mm-hmm.
And I think what a lot of folks have forgotten is that the original EU tariff on bourbons and American whiskeys that went into effect in June of 2018 had an escalator clause in it this time next year, right?
Yes, that's correct. So, and that is related to the dispute on steel and aluminum tariffs. And so that will automatically double to 50% in the spring or early June of 2021. So that's why we're very concerned that, all of these sort of inflection points here have the potential to just escalate this matter even further. And so, from the distilled spirits of the U.S. standpoint, we just continue and we work very closely with our EU colleagues to just encourage both sides to get back to the negotiating table and hammer out these trade disputes that frankly have nothing to do with us, but that unfortunately we're caught in the middle of. And it's hurting our producers. It's hurting and everybody throughout the hospitality industry. And again, especially now during all the challenges we're facing with COVID-19 and our craft distillers having their tasting rooms closed down for a long period of time. Some of them are being reclosed down given the resurgence in certain states. So now's not the time to impose more tariffs and make the situation worse. We need to get back to 0 for 0 on tariffs.
And one final question, since you are in charge of public policy at Discus, what are you hearing from the Hill in terms of any more stimulus related to the coronavirus pandemic?
We're hearing a little bit on the House side, but not sure when that may happen. I think, now it's come down to political differences about, the cost of such relief. And so we'll see what happens. But of course, if they do move forward with that, we as Discus will be certain, and we're continuing to be engaged. And one of our top priorities is to encourage and seek additional congressional support to resolve the tariff issue, but also to make the craft beverage tax cut permanent. So that's our other priority too for for the Hill this year.
All right, we have the address for the U.S. Trade Representative's website to submit comments on that tariff proposal. Give us your elevator pitch. Why should people do this?
People should do this because if you care about the spirits industry in the United States, know that 0 for 0, the fact that we had 0 tariffs for 2 decades has led to unprecedented growth in our industry. We were one of the great American export success stories, with particularly American whiskeys going to the EU, experiencing double-digit growth. Tariffs have really put a pin in that and caused some great harm. So if you care about this industry and want to see us back to getting to growth in this industry, you should care about this because even though if you may not care about EU imports, but the potential that it has to escalate this matter even further, right at this time, it's critical. So please make your voice heard. You can go to Spirits United. There's an easy way that you can click and submit a comment. We've already had about 1,100 so far, just in the span of a couple of days, but we need your help to let USTR know that this is an important issue. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us, Christine LoCascio, Director of Public Policy for the Distilled Spirits Council. Keep us posted, and we'll have you back on as we get closer to decision time from the
Will do. Thanks for your time.
All right. Once again, that's Christine LoCascio. Now, on the webcast, on the podcast this week, one of our stories related to the coronavirus pandemic was out of India, where officials in the state of Karnataka have locked things down again in the area around Bangalore or Bengaluru. and that has affected Amrut Distillery, which was the first Indian distillery to produce single malt whiskeys. I promised at the time that we were trying to follow up on it because we got word about it just before recording the show on Sunday evening. And last night I was able to get Ashok Chokalingam, the head distiller, the master distiller at Amrut in Bengaluru, on Zoom from his home, where he is locked up right now. And we'll give you a little bit of the video from that.
The last 15 days or so, we've been seeing like 1,000 cases a day in Bangalore city alone. So the government had no choice but to act on this and do something about it. So I guess the expert panel on the pandemic has suggested to do a brief lockdown for another week, which started from today until the 22nd of July. So this is and then in addition to that, we have a complete curfew in place on every Sunday. That is Saturday 8 p.m. To Monday 5 a.m. So every day we have a curfew in place from 8 in the night to morning 5. I mean, the government is trying to do its level best, but for the scale of population that what we are having is very, very difficult to control.
Obviously, the distillery is shut down right now.
Yes, we shut down the distillery from Monday itself rather than today because you start the process and then stop it again doesn't make any sense. In fact, all my fermenters are full because we had completed the mashing Saturday last week and we were supposed to start the distillation on Monday. And then what I have done is basically I chilled all the fermenters to 17 degrees Celsius, 18 degrees Celsius. It's like a kind of cold snap. So all the fermenters were like with the zero gravity anyway. So we done a cold snap and we got to wait for another 10 days before we can go and start the distillation.
How has your staff been coping with the virus? Did you have anybody get sick at the distillery?
We have had only one person so far. Other than that, touch wood, nothing has happened. So we have about like 500 people working at the distillery. And the problem is like, even when you get a normal flu, the mind always go back whether it's a COVID pandemic because the symptoms are like kind of similar apart from like, sore throat and other stuff. So a lot of people were ill with like normal viral flus and stuff. Only one person was affected with COVID, and he has reasonably recovered well.
You didn't have it go through your staff and have because with 500 people in a small environment, in a small built area like you've got at the distillery, I could easily see it getting out of hand there real quickly.
What we have done is, Mark, we were working with only half a capacity on bottling. So we made people to sit in zigzag lines, like opposite, like 1.5 meters apart. And then we had reduced our capacity to bottle as well. In the malt distillation, there is no issue at all because only 3 or 4 guys are working. And then there is an ample of opportunity to maintain social distancing. And then we have imposed like a basic hygiene, like washing the hands with the soaps and stuff. So we have done the very best possible. So far, it worked out very well.
And that's Ashok Chokalingam of Amrut in Bengaluru, India. He joined us last night via Zoom. There is a 10.5-hour time difference. So we're not getting Ashok on live because very simply it's about, I think maybe 2:33 in the morning, something their time. So that's not going to happen. But we have 2 good guests to join us right now live. Let's bring them in. Jared Himstedt, the head distiller at Balcones in Waco, Texas. Jackie Zykan is the master taster for Old Forester, based out of Louisville. How are you both doing today?
Doing good.
Yeah, hanging in there, just like everybody else.
So the question that gets asked as soon as people enter the chat rooms here is, what's in your glass? So what are the 2 of you drinking?
I will let you go first.
I've got a bunch of stuff out, but the first glass in line, I've got like 3 or 4 things lined up. But the first one I've got in line is a Gordon MacPhail Speyburn, distilled 89, bottled 2013. I was looking through my cabinet trying to think of something to grab for this, and I hadn't had a Speyburn in a while. And of course, you know this, but some of the people watching may not know. But we got their old mash tun a few years back in 2016. So this was made in our mash tun that we currently use. So that's always pretty fun to check in on.
Very cool, Jackie.
Awesome. I'm drinking water right now. I've done tasting notes all day today for some single barrels we're releasing next week. And yeah, I need a water break. Every now and then you need one of those. So
Absolutely. You've got to hydrate. And let's talk about that for just a second before I go into my dram, because you guys recently stepped up your single barrel program. I know I've got a couple of samples here to taste myself of your single barrels.
yes, so the program has been a 90 proof expression since it started back in 2013. But the bottlings that we are going to be releasing through the Old Forester retail curbside service starting next week are the first editions of the 100 proof and unfiltered barrel strength expressions. So from this point forward, all private barrel selections that are done will be bottled at either 100 or unfiltered barrel strength.
And let's give people a clue. Tell us more about that release next week, because I know the local area who will line up out. Does that mean the distillery itself is going to reopen next week?
It's not open for people to come in next week, but we do curbside service for our retail shops. So if you check out oldforester.com, you can find some more information about the current offerings they have going on. And so basically what you do is just drive right up to the front of the distillery on Main Street in downtown Louisville, Kentucky, and they come out and just bring you your beautifully packaged whiskey. So I know they're doing some couplings. I think they're going to be doing a 3-piece set. That's the remainder of what we have for a 90 proof. You'll never find the 90 proof single barrel again. And then the first 100 proof single barrel that's ever been done. And then some specialty barrel strength single barrels to choose from as well. So keep an eye on those. That inventory will just shift. When it's gone, and it usually sells out pretty quickly. So just keep an eye on the website. We have just now started kind of getting a little bit back into being active on social media. We were holding off for a little bit. So you can definitely see it. I'll be posting stuff on mine if anyone out there is curious. But I've been hiding barrels for a couple of years now. I've been hiding some good ones. Sorry, everyone out there that bought barrels, and your samples were good too, but I hid all the good ones in the corner. And we're now finally able to sell those off through the retail shop.
And we have a comment that I'm going to show on the screen, but I really can't read it, from Charles Massey. As soon as he heard about your title, Jackie, wanting to go back and kick his high school guidance counselor in a specific spot for not telling him that's what he could have become.
Charles, I was never told that either. That was never an option. It wasn't an option until I was here doing it. So all good. But I don't know. Maybe one day I'll need an assistant. If you're interested, here we are. So.
How'd you get the job? Let's explain that. How'd you get the job of master taster? Because we're familiar with blenders, we're familiar with distillers, but you got the fun job. You get to taste it without having to do all the work of making it.
Well, we have a very, very large team at Brown-Forman that works both before maturation and post maturation to make sure all of our stuff is always consistent in quality. So I have been with Old Forester going on 5 years now. Prior to that, I was a beverage director. Prior to that, I was a bar manager. Before that, I was a bartender and worked my way through a chemistry and biology degree in college. So all of those things kind of came to a head when they needed somebody that could explain it from an in-depth perspective as well as from the industry side, and just sort of serve as that spokesperson. But with that also comes full production training. So it's definitely not the last step on my adventure with Old Forester, but I'm going to hold off from saying anything further about what the future holds on that. But here we are.
But what is the career path? I mean, if you don't have if you don't do the distilling part, we know Elizabeth McCall's got that job at Woodford as the assistant master distiller. If you don't do distilling chops, where do you go from above master taster? Is it to the blending gig, or how's that going to work?
That is the plan. That is the plan. And I have to stop or I'm going to get in trouble. I got to stop. You're digging. You are a digger. You get it. But yeah.
I'm a journalist. That's what we do. We have breaking news that we need to interrupt from our pal Matt Crumpler. Bleep, our domestic terrorist Kitty just knocked over my Glencairn full of Glendronach 15. She's such a little bleep. That is a tragedy.
It's alcohol abuse.
That's alcohol abuse in its worst form. Just for the record, before we get to Jared, I am doing a little bit of a bottle kill on Redbreast 12. As you know, if you've watched these things, I stay neutral and try not to pick a whiskey from either of our guests, just to play it fair. And to be honest, one, I like Redbreast 12. Two, they're starting their 10th year with us this month as one of the presenting sponsors of WhiskyCast. So they get a special shout out after being with us this long as one of our longest sponsors ever. I'm drinking Redbreast 12, so sláinte, guys.
Good for you. Cheers.
Jared, explain this Speyburn that you were drinking, because you noted that it came out of the mash tuns that you have at the distillery now.
Right.
And I think a lot of folks don't realize that you're just as much into single malts and Scotch single malts as you are into the stuff you make, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I know everybody has their whiskey moment, but you probably had whiskey before. It was probably something that maybe wasn't very good. It was on the rocks or in Coke or something. And then you have the moment that you have a dram and it just is like, oh, okay, I get it now. But for me, that was Scotch, absolutely. And it wasn't Speyburn, it was Isla, but yeah, it just started a spark that from then on, I had to devour all the Scotch single malt I could find. Speyburn, at least in the US, I feel like it's really underappreciated. There's a lot of cool independent bottlings and single barrels and such available in the UK. But in the US, we get a pretty limited range of expressions from them, but they do a really great job. When we were commissioning our new building in 2015, I guess, Forsyth was about to start manufacturing a new mash tun for us from scratch that was going to be half as big as the one we ended up getting. But they called one day and said, well, Speyburn's decommissioning one to get a bigger one. We can retrofit it and upgrade it a little bit if you want to get that one. And it's twice as big. So yeah, there's a lot. It's nice to only do one mash a day to fill a fermenter instead of two. And walking in there and seeing a bunch of really, really old copper and brass fittings is pretty cool. Richard Forsyth Sr. was here visiting not too long after we commissioned. And we walked up on the platform. And he actually said that mash tun was one of the first projects he worked on when he joined the company. So pretty cool little bit of history. And because they only replaced theirs, 4 years ago, yeah, and most Speyburn that's going to be on the market right now is going to be made in this mash tun that we've got. So it's pretty cool. We've had some of those guys in to come by and visit.
And our pal Bert Doyle with the Association of Halifax Regional Scotch Enthusiasts, or ARS, in Halifax, Nova Scotia, just posted great to see support for a G&M product. Stephen Rankin from Gordon and MacPhail is an honorary member of their whiskey club, ARS. And ARS is our whiskey club of the month here at WhiskyCast. We just named them on the show this week. So let's talk about how the two of you both got into whiskey. And Jackie, you sort of started out as the bartender and then worked your way in. Jared, let's start with you on this one. How did you get started?
Oh, man. Well, similar to her story, it's almost one of those where you wake up and you're about to do it before you realize what's happening. The whole adage of you just keep putting one foot in front of the other and you're kind of looking down at the terrain, and then at some point you look up and realize where you've gotten to. But yeah, I was a beer guy. Thought I was going to be a brewer, tried to open breweries a couple times here in town. Financing was always a deal, or finding location, all these things. Ended opening up a beer bar with a good friend of mine that was in our homebrew club. Was managing that. And it was in that period that I discovered Scotch single malts and just kind of went head over heels. And yeah, we were homebrewing and we were talking about the possibility of making our own, and real estate in Waco was pretty cheap at the time. This predates Fixer Upper and some of the other things that have made Waco famous, and cost of living is going up a little bit, but it was pretty cheap. There's a whole industrial part of downtown with buildings that are just sitting empty, and we figured we'd go ahead and fill in an application and work on our permit and go look at buildings. And next thing you know, we had both, and trying to manage regular jobs and asking friends for money and that kind of thing, and maxing out credit cards. And yeah, next thing we knew, it was full time, and we had to leave some other things behind and jump in both feet. And yeah, it's a weird story. But yeah, the whole Chris's comment about his guidance counselor. Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting on a bunch of college debt with degrees I never used because I ended up with a job based on hobbies and side interests. So there's something to be said for that.
Tell us what your college degree really is in, because I think I remember.
I've got two. I've got two, and they're completely unrelated. I've got one in studio ceramics. So I thought I was going to be a potter. I thought I was going to maybe teach ceramics in college. And I'm also a social worker, licensed social worker in the state of Texas. Like I said, still paying college debt for some stuff that doesn't get used a whole lot.
Jackie, how about you? How did you make the transition into whiskey?
I'm right there with you, still paying for college debt, even though, I mean, I guess now you use it in ways, and I'm sure you've got this as well. You use it in ways didn't even anticipate, but the foundation of it is there. But so was originally on a path to go to medical school, but then after working in healthcare during college, sorry, and I just noticed a cat jumped in the view there. I'm surprised my dog. He's like 100 pounds. He's not sitting on my lap right now trying to get in view too. So after working through St. John's in St. Louis, just came to the realization that I just did not want to be a part of what I was seeing from that perspective of medicine. Patients weren't humans. It was all about cost, and it just was a different side. So I continued on and decided I was going to just go for pathology instead, so that the patient care aspect was kind of removed from it, and you were just kind of in your own little world.
Oh, wait a second.
What?
Yeah, pathology means you get to work with dead folks and dead.
Yeah, I know, exactly. They can't talk back. So now that we all know that, but life takes you in weird ways. I ended up applying to the Medical University of South Carolina for a post-grad pathology program. They take 3 people a year. I got in, and I had to say no. I had just gotten married for the first time. I don't know how in depth you guys want to go into my personal life, but he got a job in Louisville, Kentucky. And so we just kind of like 100% just up and left. And so within 48 hours, he had to start work, and we had to be here in Louisville. I had no reason to be here at all. This was over 10 years ago. Whiskey, I know everyone likes to think that Louisville is this whiskey bubble, and it's always been that way, but it has been subjected to the bourbon boom just as much as everywhere else has. People were still doing the wall of flavored vodkas in Louisville back at that point too. So, but I was from St. Louis. When you said whiskey, it meant anything that was brown at all. It's a beer and vodka town, and still, it's coming along, but so I get to Louisville, and I had no reason to really be here. So I just went back to what I knew, which was the bar industry. And I fell in with a group called the Fall City Hospitality Group. They opened up the first whiskey bar down on Whiskey Row in Louisville, down on Main Street, called Doc Crow's, if anyone's ever been there. So I quickly rose through to become their bar manager and set up their program. And then as they opened more and more places in Tennessee and then back in Kentucky and then planned for Ohio and everything else, I just opened all their bars. But it was great. One of the owners was a master sommelier and taught me a lot about not necessarily finding different notes, but just giving it a little bit of strategy and technique. The entire time that I bartended all through undergrad, I wasn't really a drinker. I went through my drinking phase before I legally should admit I went through my drinking phase. So I wasn't a drinker at that point. I learned all of my cocktails by smell, which is actually something that in retrospect was very beneficial for me. So studying under Brett Davis and then obviously doing the buying for all of these different bars just forces you to taste and smell everything across categories. So while having that job and working about 100 hours a week for them across 2 different states, I picked up Shaker for Hire gigs on the side through Heaven Hill, through Woodford, through Four Roses. I opened up Copper and Kings on their marketing team as a cocktail consultant as well. I was the St. Germain brand ambassador. I was all over the place. I don't sit still very well. So through that, just sort of built a name for myself. I get that question a lot. How did you get that job? It's like, well, when you are constantly involved in things in the spirits industry in a city that hubs a lot of spirits companies, you run in the same circles as a lot of people, and it's a lot easier to build a name for yourself. So that was definitely part of it. But one day, Old Forester noticed that they were getting a lot of ground gain on the on-premise in the liter size. That's how we judge by that, for the 100 proof, which was something kind of new for them. And all these craft bartenders are picking up this whiskey, but we don't really know how to bridge with them. We don't know how to communicate with them. We need someone that can understand the whiskey itself and someone who can also understand the world they're coming from. And so my name came up because on the team was someone I worked with Four Roses, someone I worked with Woodford previously, someone I worked with Jack previously. And so it was sort of just this moment. So here I am. Now I have a job. Very grateful to have one right now too.
So tell us exactly what you do besides pick barrels. Is that your main function? I know you helped pick the barrels for the birthday bourbon this year that's coming out in September. Tell us about your daily function.
Yep. So birthday's a fun one. That's like 2 days a year. You know what I mean? We proof it in January and then you're part of all the release stuff, which is great. But this will be my 4th year working with Chris Morris on the birthday release. So that's always something really fun. Other things such as the single barrel program, I maintain the entire inventory for that. So when you get a sample sent to you in the mail, I'm the one that drilled it out of the barrel and said it was good enough for the program. Yeah. But so there's that. I still do the tastings for those. I stopped doing them on site at the distillery because my travel schedule was too chaotic, but obviously that's not the case anymore. But new product development is now falling under my umbrella as well. So you'll be seeing some new releases come out for Old Forester in the next year or so that were sort of my baby. The entire campaign of all of the cocktails we do is mine. Our licensed products and our mixers are all mine. I don't know. I'm like, what would you say you do here? I do a lot of stuff. It's not necessarily just tasting barrels, but it's all over the place. No day is ever the same.
Barrels for each batch, basically, pretty much.
Yeah. Oh, yes, definitely. But I do work solely for Old Forester. However, everybody that's part of our sensory department and part of our quality control goes across full portfolio. So Jack Daniel's distillate, Finlandia vodka. They want to change the sugar source for Chambord. Okay, you're on those panels as well. So it's kind of everywhere. But yeah, I'm all over.
Well, we have a question now from Chris Ratcliffe, and I'm just pulling it up here for Jared. Is it bad to admit I've never had a Balcones release? Where should I start? And Chris is in the UK, so he doesn't have access to everything that comes out of Balcones. So, Jared, where would you tell Chris to start?
Yeah, I guess it depends if you're mostly a bourbon drinker or a single malt drinker. If you're a single malt drinker, our regular flagship single malt should be available over there, the Black Label. Pretty readily available. We also, if you're more of a bourbon guy, I don't know if any of our bourbons have made it over there, and when they do, they probably disappear pretty quick. But you probably could find some of the 100 proof True Blue, which is our 100% blue corn expression. That's got a lot of overlap with bourbon profiles. But no, it's not bad to say you haven't had anything. We live in a very fortunate time to just walk into a store and be flooded with whiskey options. So, I mean, it's not like I've tried single malts from every Scotch distillery. So, yeah, don't feel bad about that.
But let's talk about the one that has some Scottish influence that you just released 2 days ago, in fact, on the 13th. The Lineage single malt that has both Texas barley and Golden Promise barley from Scotland.
Yeah, much like Jackie, you're doing sensory work all the time. It's really easy to get something finished and then jump and then move on because there's something else that has to be smelled and tasted. So you mentioning it to me off the air before we got started made me realize that I probably haven't had it since we finished the blend. And so, yeah, I figured I might as well pour some and check on, now that it's bottled and has been sitting for a little bit, settle down a little bit, see how it turned out. But yeah, we are releasing our first new single malt expression, kind of core expression. And our regular single malt is it's varied some over the years, and the profile and the approach to the blending has changed, but it's largely a very traditional approach to the liquid and a very American approach to the maturation. So it's not always 100% virgin oak, but it's mostly, and if they're used barrels, they're barely used, so they still have a lot of character left. But it's always been Golden Promise with the Scottish barley on our Forsyth stills and our Speyburn mash tun, M1 yeast, very traditional Scotch approach to laying down that single malt, but then aged in a very familiar American type of barrel. Then we've had a couple of other releases. We did Mirador twice now, which is our exclusively refill. So that's more familiar, like kind of a space ID approach. It's floral, it's delicate, it's kind of understated, all ex-bourbon barrels or ex-rye. And then last summer, we did our first release of Texas grown and malted barley, which has only been available for the last maybe like 4 years, if that, maybe not even quite that much, 3.5 years or so. So every once in a while, we pull out kind of all of the weird stuff or anything that doesn't have a designated home just to see how they're going and check on their development. And we were doing that in the blending room, trying to figure out special releases for next year. And there's everything from, 4 to 5 different kinds of wine finishes to floor malted, drum malted, Texas barley. We've got Scottish stuff. We've got some specialty grains in there. And yeah, we just kind of gave ourselves free rein to combine everything that was in front of us into something that we were just, what was the most fun thing? What was the most interesting, kind of engaging thing for us to try and combine, even if we didn't know where it was going to end up. And also anybody who works in sensory work, you're looking at a lot of samples and a lot of high proof samples sometimes. And I'd been wanting to release a lower proof version of our malt for a while, and a profile that was a little bit less robust and kind of over the top as some of our 100 proof, 106 proof expressions. So yeah, it was a long time coming, and we got the green light to kind of pursue a profile that's a little more subtle, a little more understated, a little more approachable, and kind of working off the idea too that not everyone's a nerd with a collection like what you have or I have behind me. There's a lot of regular folks that I don't think 47% ABV is a big whiskey, but for a lot of people that's kind of nuts already. And we don't chill filter, so that's about as low as we're willing to go. But just to see if we could find some steps in between those of us that live and breathe, eat and drink whiskey world all day, and just regular neighbors, family, friends, and something that can kind of bridge that gap and help be one step in between where they're at and where we live and breathe, and just kind of something we can meet in the middle a little bit as far as profile.
And also come in at a lower price point too. I know
right.
That was a concern. This is only $39.99 recommended retail price.
Right. Now that we're actually over the last just maybe couple of years, 2-3 years, we finally have enough people on the ground in markets that information we just didn't have at our disposal in years past. So we actually get to sit down and talk to them and ask if there's barriers, not just to getting into our products, but if there's just barriers, what is it that keeps people from getting into the whiskey life, if you will. And category comes up a lot. Before we had a bourbon in the portfolio, that would come up a lot, that people walk up to the table or you're walking into an account that's got whiskey everywhere, and you're trying to convince them to carry something you make. And they say, I'll taste your bourbon. And then when you say you don't have one, they just walk right off. So category is a big deal, and obviously proof and price, especially for small craft producers, it's all very expensive stuff. But I know for us, we didn't ever set out to make something that, is in the price range of 3% of the whiskey market or something. So yeah.
Jackie, how much does price figure in when you're coming up with new expressions at Old Forester?
It's always part of it. There are some things, though, that we have a little bit more liberty with Old Forester as a brand. It's a brand that's always been kind of known for the best bang for your buck. So we do want to make sure that we teeter in that lower price space, even though I hate the idea that the more something costs, the better it is. And I think that that's just something that we're always fighting with consumers in general. But for Old Forester, there are certain things that it had to make perfect sense. A really great example of this is the 100 proof rye expression that came out a year and a half ago or so. And a lot of ryes on the market. Every brand wants to do a rye. Oh, they're doing a rye. We're going to do a rye. We're going to do a rye. And ours is going to be $100 bottle. We're going to do a rye. And, it's hot right now. So ours is going to be whatever bottle. You had to look at why rye existed and why it started growing in popularity in the first place. And that's what we did with Old Forester. It had many, many, many days where I left the office like, I'm getting a phone call tonight, don't come back, because I have done nothing but argue with people all day long today. But the proof had to line up, the price had to line up. It had to make perfect sense for a cocktail menu. Not to say that it's not good on its own. That also had to happen as well. But we try to keep everything reasonable. We don't gouge. We don't falsely make scarcity happen. That's just the thing. Even with the most expensive expression that we have so far is birthday bourbon. And even that, we have no control over what retailers price it at, but we suggest it's like $100-something bucks. And that's it. That's the oldest whiskey we'll put in a bottle. So I don't know, you'll never see Old Forester come out with anything much older than that, just because we do use heat cycled warehousing, and that really limits us on age range. But we're not about just trying to inflate something for a price tag on it at all.
I wanted to read a comment from James Clapsaddle here, and it's going to take a second. Dom Perignon, when he tasted a wine that would make bubbly champagne popular, cried out, "Come quick, for I am tasting the stars." I shared some Balcones pot-stilled bourbon with a German friend of mine, a wine and champagne exporter. After tasting it, he exclaimed, "Come quick, for I am drinking the thunder."
I don't know. Is that an improvement over stars, or is that?
Well, with bourbon, yeah, I can imagine, yeah, because the wine is nice and refined,
Sure.
and the champagne and the stars and the bubbly, and the bourbon brings the thunder. So, yeah, I thought that was a great thing. Duncan Gray goes, "Wish we got these in South Africa." And I'm assuming he's referring to both of your whiskeys, because I don't know how much Old Forester makes it to South Africa. And I know that probably not much Balcones at all makes it down there.
I wouldn't think so. If somebody sees it in South Africa, somebody brought it in their suitcase.
And talking about your True Blue, Jared, is Balcones the only distillery in the U.S. to use blue corn? That may not be the case, but you guys do it with True Blue, right?
We've only used blue corn ourselves in house, and as far as I know, we were the first to do it. Not that we were trying to go do something that hadn't been done, but I think there's definitely other people that have messed around with blue corn. We're actually the lazy ones now, because some of the Mexican green stuff and Bloody Butcher, and there's a bunch of other really cool heirloom varieties that people have explored with, and we kind of stuck with our workhorse and haven't really played outside the blue space. So.
And I wanted to bring up a comment here, if I can find it, from Gretchen Galladay. Talked about the Old Forester tasting you did earlier this year at $7 grand in Austin, and Gretchen called that one of her favorite tasting events of all time. Jackie, it sounds like that must have been a pretty good night.
Aw, thanks, Gretchen. I miss being able to go to Austin. Can't wait to get back on the road again. It's one of those things that you deal with it while it's there, but then when it's gone, it's like, oh man, I don't know. We're expanding so much. The brand's growing so well. And I wish I could get out there and see people's expressions when they get to taste it for the first time. And that's one part that you really miss when you have to do everything this way. But we'll get there. We'll get there eventually. But thank you, Gretchen.
I've got to figure this is about the longest that the two of you have spent at home in a long time. Basically since March, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's been years since I've not even left in state anything. That's pretty crazy. I don't mind that part. I'm got a about to be 10-year-old and about to be 2-year-old, so I can't imagine with everything that's been going on, if I was also on the road, things at home would not be going super well.
And Duncan Gray says, from South Africa, only way I've got Balcones and Old Forester is either from a friend coming from the U.S. or on auction. Both incredible. And Graham Fraser lives in the UK and wants to know, Jackie, how many different bottlings does Old Forester release? Run through the range for us real quickly.
Sure. Well, Graham, in the UK, you guys only have 2 right now. 3 if you include Statesman. You guys have the 86 proof, you have the 1870, and then you've got Statesman as well. So hang tight. We're trying to expand. But other than that, our core includes an 86 proof, 100 proof everyday, and the 100 proof rye. Whiskey Row series will give you 1870, 1897, 1910, and 1920. And then Statesman is kind of in there, but it's not. It's just sort of the cousin of the brand that we always forget about, but is delicious. And then you've got your higher end stuff. So the President's Choice expression is only available in Kentucky, mostly through the retail shop. Birthday Bourbon is US only. Single Barrel is US, Canada, UK, and Australia expand this year. So that's great. When I say UK, though, I'm leaving it out, Graham, of like something you can find on a shelf. They did 1 barrel. We'll be doing more, but they've done 1 barrel like in the last year. So it might be there, might not. Other than that, there's more stuff coming. there's a lot more stuff coming, but it's probably going to be pretty limited.
And for the friends in the UK, tell them about Statesman, because that has the tie-in to the Kingsman movies.
Definitely. So Statesman was a product that we created to celebrate our involvement with Kingsman The Golden Circle, and you have not seen the end of that partnership yet. There'll be some more activity buzzing around that later on this year, actually. So the Statesman is a 95 proof Old Forester blend. It's the only blend that we do specifically based on warehouse location. So in a heat cycled warehouse, it's a little bit different than the way we think about these open air brick warehouses, things that you have like a Wild Turkey at Heaven Hill at Beam, where the top floors get super hot and the lower floors not so much. Heat rises. It's science. It happens. In heat cycled warehousing, our warehouses are built of brick and concrete. There's basically a concrete slab every 2 floors. So you have these sort of insulated cells, if you will. Now, it's left to nature's own devices from April till October, but generally, depending on what the temperature is or is not in October, is when we start utilizing heat cycling. So we keep temperature probes in our odd floors, so 1, 3, 5, and 7. Those are in the internal of the barrels in the middle of the warehouse. And once those start reaching 65 degrees Fahrenheit, moving downwards, we turn the heat on and bring it up 10 degrees minimum, turn the heat off, and let it cycle like that all winter long. So you're basically getting the same effect. As a difference if you had a cup of hot water and put a tea bag in it and just let it sit there and not touch it, versus if you sat there and dunked it, and you're getting a little bit more movement. So in general, it's not always perfect, but in general, you can get about 6 more months of maturation on your year of whiskey spent there. So a 4-year-old drinks like a 6-year-old. So when I say Statesman comes from the hot spots of the warehouse, I don't mean the top floors. I mean those areas around the perimeter that sit in the sun all summer long, and the areas of barrels that are stored by heat ducts where they're going to get the most influence of that.
And that collaboration that you've mentioned with the movie wouldn't have anything to do with the fact that there's a new Kingsman movie coming this fall, theoretically.
Yes. You'll be seeing a little bit more noise about it this fall with that new movie coming out. Not a new product for it. Same old Statesman. New products have nothing to do with the movie, but you will see us probably talking about it a little bit more this year.
Couldn't resist, because I will admit that I have watched both of the Kingsman movies over and over again, including Golden Circle, and loved them both. And Graham Fraser says he can't wait, saw the film. We'll look out for the Statesman bottling. Jared, Charles Massey has a question for you. He wants to know about the different color seals on your bottles, because you use a different color for almost every different expression, right?
Yeah. It's probably less. There's probably less of a system than maybe you think there is. So our single malt for a long time had the red wax, and it's the only one until the new single malt that just came out to have the red wax. I mean, honestly, I do a lot of our design work, and it usually ends up being aesthetic. The only consistent thing would be that special releases, distillery only, or pretty limited stuff that goes to the Texas market. They almost always have the gold, kind of the copper seal, no matter what the label looks like. But most of the rest of them, it really has mostly to do with color coordination. I'd love to tell you it was otherwise. Malt's red, corn's black. I don't know, but that's not the case. Maybe we'll tighten it up someday, and they'll actually mean something. But
You mentioned the old distillery under the bridge.
yeah.
Last time I was down there a couple of years ago, you guys had not really done anything with that yet after moving to the current building.
Yeah.
Has anything been done with that yet? Is it still there?
It's still sitting there. I mean, I think a day will come where we'll have so much excess people and time that to go back down there and run some batches that are a lot more manual and a lot more labor intensive to produce, a 10th as much in a day will make sense. It hasn't really yet, but we definitely hope to go back. And, maybe eventually there's a series of stuff that comes out from the old building that's labeled as such. But I miss it sometimes, but it's nice to not have to sit at the still and checking gauges every 10, 15 minutes and not be able to do anything else pretty much all day, just sit on the platform. But yeah, no, it's still a refuge for, granddaddy long legs and probably maybe some raccoons. It's a wildlife refuge currently.
I know when you and Winston Edwards took me through there a couple of years ago, there were some critters running around.
There's some critters. There's some cobwebs. We could probably do like one of those. We could probably do like a haunted house thing for like a church or something in the fall. Oh, in a normal world, but not quarantine.
The haunted distillery sounds like I've heard all of people doing that before. That might be kind of fun.
Yeah.
Jackie, a question for you. How much of the production for Old Forester is split between your distillery on Whiskey Row and the big distillery over by the company offices?
So Brown-Forman Distillery down in Shively has produced every single drop of what you find in a bottle today. The distillery on Whiskey Row on Main Street, that stuff is not going to be of legal maturity for our standards until 2022. And then from a flavor perspective, I'm not guaranteeing that it'll be ready at that point. So we shall see. So right now, 100% out of Shively, but we have not been utilizing the still down there throughout the entirety of this quarantine period, because we do operate our bottling function down there for all of our craft products, all the Whiskey Row, all the single barrels. We have done our best to keep as many people out of the building as possible to protect that core bottling team, to make sure we don't have any upset there. So you're not going to have our open fermenters are not sitting, like it's pretty shut down and pretty quiet down there. So I don't know. We can produce the amount of Old Forester that's circulating and being sold right now. We can do a third of the total volume of it out of that distillery on Main Street. It's just a matter of we still haven't even gotten to that point where we've maxed out the capacity because we haven't needed to just yet.
Jared, what's the status at your place down in Waco? I know that it was shut down for a while, and I know the governor keeps opening and closing bars as the pandemic peaks and falls, but what's your current status?
I mean, we were deemed essential from day one, even before the sanitizer push, but we jumped on that. So we probably stopped whiskey production for about 6 weeks, and we've been back on it for almost a month now. We made enough sanitizer. We still have a ton around. So if they run out, if we have EMTs and hospitals and stuff coming and needing more, we probably would switch back, but we haven't needed to yet. The bar side, the front of house side, yeah, it's been open and closed, and we're closed currently. We can do curbside, and we do beer here too, so we can sell growlers and stuff like that. But it's a mess. I mean, I feel really fortunate. We were able to retain everybody except a few, kind of part-time bar staff. Everybody transitioned. They're either helping out in the warehouse, they're helping with packaging, they're doing something else in the building. So I feel pretty fortunate we were able to keep everybody getting paid and working. But yeah, it's been tricky. We haven't had any cases yet. And just like you were talking about earlier, it's funny because like everybody gets a sniffle or, you stub your toe and everyone's like freaking out and worried that they've got the disease. But it's better to be safe than sorry, and trying to figure out creative ways to protect teams and keep people as isolated as possible and have as little interaction as we can between packaging, warehouse, blending, still house people, brew house people. It's not fun. People miss each other. They're waving from far away with masks on, but yeah, just trying to stay healthy over here.
And Graham asks, will Old Forester and Balcones distilleries be open for visitors and tourists after COVID? Yeah, they were open before, and presumably at some point they'll be open again. We just have to wait and see how long it's going to take. And I think you already answered Bert's question about producing hand sanitizer in Waco. How much did you guys produce in Louisville?
I could not even give you the number of the total amount we threw out there. We started it pretty early on. Once it all started kind of running short, especially Brown-Forman was making it exclusively for first responders and medical personnel. But I popped in really quick the other day to my office on our corporate campus, and every desk had a big old bottle of it sitting on there. So I don't know. The selfish side of me was like, I want to go around and like hoard it, but no, I'll let everyone have it. I don't know. It's something that, likewise, if you need to make more, we have the ability to do so. But right now I feel like we've stashed up enough and we're hanging in there, ready to get back to welcoming people inside the building as quickly as we possibly can. So fingers crossed that we all get there sooner than later.
Yeah, I hope I'm still waiting for somebody to come out with a peated hand sanitizer. I think
there you go. It won't be us.
Gosh.
You guys go for it.
Gray remembered that one of his favorite Balcones whiskeys is the Mirador, that reminds him of a seriously well-aged Speyside whiskey. Tell us about Mirador.
Yeah, we used to use a lot of refill ex-bourbon in the regular single malt blends, and that slowly kind of faded over the years where we were using less and less. So we always had them around, and anybody who does blending, I mean, you have like really woody, spicy and tannic barrels. They can kind of overpower some really subtle, delicate stuff. So even using them in the other blends stopped kind of making sense. But we were like, well, if we don't use it for that, we have to do something else with it. And like I mentioned, my love for Speyside stuff it was kind of always my escape from to go in a very polar opposite direction from the kind of stuff we make. And there's a little bit of a professional curiosity to see. Most of our stuff is a little bit unorthodox and has been. But with Mirador, it definitely was an attempt to see if we were to kind of pay more of an homage to some of those Speyside malts that are historically just amazing and part of my own personal journey. Could we hang in that space? Could we make something that we feel like is respectful and add something to that tradition? So, like I said, we were just taking home samples ourselves, just like finish blending and take home a little bottle because you're like, well, I don't have anything to do with this, but this barrel's awesome. And eventually we were like, well, we got to share that with people. We've done that with a bunch of stuff. The High Plains was kind of like that. The French Oak, kind of isolated. We have all these components that we get to blend with. And I think one of the things that's really fun for us is kind of flattening the structure of the whiskey community a little bit and kind of inviting people along for the ride and things that are kind of sometimes there's like it's the Wizard of Oz and you pull back the veil and it's this tiny guy with a projector. But I think consumers are more informed. It's a lot of fun for a producer too, to walk people through and sit and taste a bunch of oak species and ages of things and wine finishes and, floor malting versus drum and all of that stuff that we get really excited about in house to be able to share that with people. And Mirador there was a little bit of that we have all these cool refill barrels and just to be able to share those with people that might appreciate it.
So, Jackie, I know you probably couldn't answer this question if you wanted to, but when might we see, or would we ever see, an Old Forester rye?
When will we see an Old Forester rye?
Old Forester rye. I haven't seen one.
You haven't seen one? It's been out for a year and a half.
Thinking about it, but to see Old Forester do the ryes, it'd be interesting because I think people think of Old Forester as bourbon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we released the Old Forester 100 proof rye February of 2019 across the U.S. And
oh yeah, I remember that one now. Yeah,
it's been a massive success. It's been amazing. It's done a lot better than I think that we had even anticipated it would be. So it's good. It'll be out there. It'll be out there running. You might maybe see some more exciting things with the rye coming up in like 8 months or so. I don't know. You might not. I don't know.
Yeah. I know you're not going to tell me.
Oh, I didn't even hear your question.
I was saying Cask-Strength, perhaps.
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe not.
I know. Chris Ratcliffe says, Jared, are there other Scottish traits that you'd like to experiment with? And what do you think of the growth of American single malts? And you're one of the leaders of the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission. So I know you have a lot of passion for that.
Sure, absolutely. It's a pretty rare. I've been in a pretty fortunate position to, we were a pretty early adopter in what has become a pretty thriving and vibrant Texas whiskey scene, which literally didn't exist before Balcones and then Garrison. Not in that order. Garrison got going first, but we both kind of jumped in 2007, 2008, and now here we are, and it's pretty nuts. So to be a part of a whiskey tradition in a state that didn't have one, and on the other hand, with one of my first loves, which is Scotch single malts, to watch this just absolute explosion of not just American single malt, but world malts period has just been pretty cool. Anybody that's a single malt fan and watching the last decade of what's available to the consumer and regions of the world that never made single malts, it still feels like the sky's the limit and we're just getting started. But I do think the future for American single malt's bright. If you go to American Single Malt Whiskey Commission website, you can join even as a consumer. If you're listening and you're a producer that makes one and you haven't already joined, throw your hat in the ring and help us kind of push this federal class type identities over the finish line, which we've got pretty good feelers out. We think this is it's got a pretty strong chance of going through, but just to be making whiskey in a part of the world that's never been explored before. It still feels like we're just scratching the surface, even 12 years in. Got so much more to play with. But yeah, the other aspects of other Scotch traits we might want to play with. It's kind of tough. I was talking to the guys from Westland at the World Whiskey Forum. I think that's maybe the last trip I took, February, maybe. We were talking about local ingredients, and we've got ourselves in this little bit of a conundrum with local peat, because Southeast Texas, the Piney Woods and south of there is pretty wetlands and pretty boggy, headed down from there down to the coast. And I found an old paper, an agricultural paper from the early 1900s that they had done a bunch of core samples and actually done some chemical analysis on peat available in that area, and which was useful for fuel and which was not. And we went so far as trying to track down who owns those plots of land and everything, thinking if there's peat in Texas, we'd be just absolutely remiss not to use it. But now we're stuck with this thing that I think everybody should struggle with. And if you don't, maybe think about the sustainability of what you do. But we're coming up against the fact that the community in the area wants more and more of that land protected and feels like it's already kind of being abused and could disappear at some point if it's not taken better care of. So we found ourselves in this really crappy position of, we found this really awesome thing that is a single malt producer to harvest and smoke some barley with peat is a no-brainer, except it would be a really bad thing for the area. Nobody really wants that to happen. So we very likely might have to just walk away from it and never see what that could be like. But yeah, we're not just we're as people, we got a lot more going on than we're just not just manufacturers of a product that people buy and consume. So we got to think about some bigger picture stuff, and hopefully there's a silver lining to everything going on in the world right now. It might be our opportunity to take some time and sit with some hard things and maybe come out better on the other side of it.
One final question for each of you. Tell me the craziest experience you've had out on the road where somebody realized that you make this stuff, sitting at a bar, or not necessarily at a festival where everybody knows who you are, but just sort of sitting at the bar or traveling, and when you go, yeah, I make that, or yeah, I taste that, or yeah, I picked the barrels for that. Tell me the story of the craziest story you've ever heard where it was just no way. Jackie, we'll start with you.
Oh man, I don't know. The stories are going through my mind. Like, I feel like I'm going to get in trouble if I say I'm going to get a text from our PR team right away and be like, no. I don't know. It's interesting because if we want to start getting into this sector of it, there's not a lot of people in the industry still. It's changing, but there's not a lot of females that go out and talk about the stuff outside of certain roles. So I do have something to fight uphill with every single time I do a tasting, or every single time I do an event. It just happens. But I don't know. I remember Breckenridge Bourbon and Bacon Hog Fest. That's what it is, like Bourbon and Bacon Festival in Breckenridge, Colorado. I don't know why this is the one that stands out in my mind. This is not a positive story. I should not be sharing this. The world has enough crap going on in it. But it was the first time ever that I realized that it's not just exclusive to men thinking that you don't know what you're talking about. Somebody asked me how I got my job, and a woman in the back of the room just shouted "casting couch" really, really loud. And immediately I had no idea what else to say about anything. Was just like, oh, like what? So I just proceeded to go on and on and on about how many hours I worked and how much I studied and how much this and how much that. And at the end of it was just like, oh my God, that lady just completely dismantled me, and that's never going to happen again. I can't give her the power to do that. But it's interesting. I don't have a lot of experiences where people didn't realize what I did. Usually the field teams that put together market visits for us when we go out have everything pretty buttoned up, and like they know they've got like a poster with your face on it outside the liquor barn, so that is what it is. But I don't know. It's always funny to me when I go to the grocery store. That's when I get it. I go to the grocery store and I get the checkout, and they're like, oh, how's your day? What are you doing? Because everybody wants to talk now. Like everyone's been like locked down and everyone is so anxious to have a conversation. And I'm like, oh yeah, just, nothing. Oh, so what do you do? the master tasting for Old Forester. And in Louisville, it's like, really? Oh my God. And they're like, whoa, really? I'm like, yeah, I drink for a living. And then they're like, oh, I want to drink for a living too. I'm like, no, you don't want to drink for a living. It's great, but it's the job.
That if one is walking through Louisville Airport, last time I checked, and you're walking towards baggage claim from the gates, and you look to your right, you're going to see a big picture of Jackie.
Yeah, that's there. I forget
Louisville
that.
promotion signs. And has anybody recognized you from that?
Never in the airport, but outside of the airport, I get it every now and then. I got it at the Apple store once. A guy was like, "You're the airport chick. I keep wondering what your arm says." And I'm like, "Really? You remembered that I had some?" Oh, okay, well, sir, here you go. I've gotten it at just the most random places, but I travel 50% of the time normally when things aren't shut down. I pass that picture multiple times, never once has anyone ever recognized me. I probably look like hell. I'm probably tired and hungover, beat and been on the road, but never once has anyone.
TSA guys who see it every day?
Do I?
Not even the TSA folks that see that picture every day?
No.
Now,
I don't know. But if you asked me, like, who else is on the wall of the airport, I have no idea either. So, like, I wouldn't expect anyone to remember my face is up there.
Begs the question on the market spend on those huge posters in the airport.
Right.
I don't think I really have any crazy ones. My wife used to ask me, like, and my daughter too, my almost 10-year-old, her perception of what famous is pretty skewed. She's 9. But it really doesn't happen that much. Probably one of my favorite ones was at the Whiskey Exchange show in London, where a guy came up and opened his laptop, and he worked in mostly in beer analysis. And so he worked in a lab. I want to say he worked in Germany, I think. But that's what he did professionally, was beer analysis, like lab stuff. And he had done a paper that as far as I know, still isn't published, but he was trying to look at phenol levels in the mash and then in the finished product. And he was comparing Supernova and Octomore, and he had thrown brimstone in the mix just for fun. And so he like pulled it up and shut it before I could see the results. But he had thrown us in the mix to do this, kind of nerdy technical study on smoke levels in the actual bottle. And he closed it before I could see the numbers, but he wanted to let me know that brimstone was officially the smokiest in bottle. But yeah, no, I haven't had a whole lot of geek out ones. I'm not sure if I'm the most approachable. Maybe someone's thinking it and haven't said anything to me. I don't know.
Well, thank you both for joining us. Hang on just a second here, and I'm going to say goodbye and then stick with us for just a second here. That does it for another one of our Whiskey Wednesday webcasts. I hope you will join us on Friday. We do our regular Writers Roundtable on Friday. Clay Risen, who writes for the New York Times, is on the staff there and just moved over from opinion to the politics section. Gee, I wonder why. There's an election coming up. But he also writes about whiskey. He has a new whiskey book coming out later this year. He'll be joining us along with Nino Marchetti, Kilgore Marchetti of the Whiskey Wash. He'll be joining us as well. And we will also have another fresh episode of the WhiskyCast podcast that's coming up this weekend. Thanks again for joining us. Once again, if you came in late, you can catch the replay later on YouTube and on our Facebook page as well. Until we meet again, I'm Mark Gillespie. Take care of yourselves, wear a mask if you're out in public, and Sláinte mhath.